The next data type I want to talk about are strings. And this is the one we have seen a lot by now. All we're talking here are words. And this is something we do have to talk quite a lot about because we are going to use them extensively. Strings are created either with single or with double quotation marks. You could either write word with single quotation marks, this one and this one, or you could use double quotation marks, this one and this one. Python really doesn't care. The only limitation is that you have to stick to the same kind of quotation mark. You couldn't add a single quotation mark and then end with a double quotation mark. And strings have a ton of methods to manipulate them. I guess some examples we have seen are upper, is numeric, and strip. What we haven't seen yet is you can also use strings with math operations. For example, if you add hello plus world, you are combining these two strings. We are going to explore that functionality a bit more in this section. Besides that, you can also add values into strings in quite a few different ways. The most important concept here that you have to understand are f-strings. You will see in a second what that means. It's basically another kind of method. And finally, we can also cover how to write over multiple lines and how to add quotation marks inside of a string. And that's a ton of stuff to cover, so let's have a look at all of this. Let's start by creating some test variable. And in here, to create a string, we can either use single quotation marks or double quotation marks. I guess let's start with single quotation marks. Let's call it test1. And then for test variable 2, we can have double quotation marks with test2. If I run the code now, all of this is going to work just fine. As a matter of fact, if I print test var1 and test var2, both of them are going to give the same result. Python does not care if we use double or single quotation marks. The one thing Python does care about is that we do not mix quotation marks, meaning something like this wouldn't work if I run it. We are getting a syntax error, undetermined string literal. I think the reason here should be quite obvious. It would be very strange. What I also want to do, starting from, well, now, is to comment my code. So it's going to be a bit easier to read when you read through it. And this section here is about quotes for strings. Along with that, there's one important thing that we do have to cover, and that is quotes inside of strings. What that means, let me create another test variable. Let's call it test var3. And let's do an example. Let's say I have the case that he said, and then I want other quotation marks, this was great. And let me add a bit of white space here so this is easier to understand. We are using quotation marks here, and that way we are creating a string. Inside of this string though, we have another quote. And you can already see by the colors here, Python is not exactly happy about it. If I run all of this, we are getting an error, invalid syntax. Python just doesn't know what to make of it. As far as Python is concerned, we are starting a string here and we are ending the string here. Then we are adding some random words and then we are creating another string. The reason now why Python is confused is because these three words are neither variables nor inbuilt functions, so Python just doesn't know what to do with them and it gives us an error. So how can we get around it? And there are two ways of doing this. The first one that you are probably going to use the most is to mix the quotation marks. Now we have single quotation marks to create a string, and inside of the string we have double quotation marks to explain that we have a quote. This Python is completely fine with. Let me print it actually, test var3. If I run this now, we are getting, he said, this was great. Python has no problem with that. And let me remove the white space. That should make all of this a bit easier to read. While we're at it, I also want to comment out this stuff here at the top, so things are a bit easier to see. Now if I run this, we can see we have quotes inside of a string. This would also work the other way around. If I start with double quotation marks and end with double quotation marks, Then inside of here, I can add single quotation marks like this, run it again, and we would also see the result. Now we have single quotation marks. This would be one way to approach this. Although this system has its limitation. For example, if I add a test var 4, and in here, we want to have, for whatever reason, a single quotation mark, a double quotation mark, and then a single quotation mark as well. And this would just not work. Python would just get very confused. Not exactly something you would do all the time, but it might come up once every year, and then you have a problem. To overcome this, you need what is called an escape character. Let me add a comment, an escape character. An escape character is, again, a /. And this you need in front of every character you want Python to just interpret as a string. And this you need in front of every character you want Python to interpret as a normal character. So in my case, I want this escape character in front of my double quotation mark and my single quotation mark. And now you can see the comment appears as a proper comment. If I print it, I can see the 2 quotation marks. This way, you can literally add any kind of character without it disturbing your code. As a matter of fact, let me rename this to simple escape character, because escape characters can do quite a bit, which means I want to add another comment for escape characters. What we can do in here, let me comment out the earlier part, and now I want to have a test var 5. And for this one, I want to print some text over multiple lines. Let's say I want to have line 1, some text, and then I want to have line 2, some more text. And I want to tell Python that this should be over multiple lines of code. For example, if you want to build some kind of text editor, you want to store all of the text inside of one string. But when you present a string, you want to have line breaks between them. How could you do that? I guess let me print the test var first. If I run this, we get all of this on one line. And to create a line break in here, we need, once again, the / and then the letter n. If I run this now, we are getting those 2 lines on, well, different lines. /n tells Python that we want to add a line break between these 2 different parts of the string. There are actually quite a few more. For example, /t is adding a tab inside of your string. There's also /r. This one adds another kind of line break. You don't really have to know the difference here. For your purposes, work essentially the same. /n, though, is the most common one. So that way, you can write text over multiple lines. Besides that, let me add multiple lines as a comment here. There's another way to write multiple lines. And this is one way we have actually already seen. What you need here are triple quotation marks, something that Python by default considers a comment. However, if you assign this comment here to a variable, let's call this one test var 6, all of a sudden it changes the color and it becomes a string. And this string is kind of special because for this one, Python does respect the white space, which means now I can press space, end up on another physical line, write some more text, do the same thing again, and then write on another line. If I print this test var 6, Python is going to preserve all of the line breaks. For example, what we could be doing in here, let me actually copy it. That should save some time. I could copy something like this in here. If I run this now, we have the tree we created in one of the very first section of this entire series. And this is a much easier way to see what's going on. Although, granted, because of the first line here, this is a bit difficult to understand. But with all of this covered, we have quite a bit more understanding about strings. Now, there are 2 more things that I do want to cover. The first one is math and strings. And before we start that, let me comment out the earlier stuff so it doesn't get confusing. What you can do, let's call this test var7. You can add something like one string, hello, and then plus a world. And Python, when it sees this plus, it is just going to combine these two strings. If I print test var7 now, we are getting hello world. Keep in mind here, there's no space between the two, because neither hello nor world have any white space. One way to add them would be to just add them here and then combine all of these with another plus. You can add as many pluses here as you want. There's no limit on it. This would also work with different types of quotation marks. Python literally does not care. Another math operation that we can use, let me create a test var8. Let me write a word like copy. I can multiply it. For example, times 10. If I now print the result, I get the word copy copied 10 times. But again, I think this concept here should be fairly straightforward. Let me comment it out. And now we come to the most important section of this entire video. And that is how to get values into strings. And let's do this by example. I have a name, and in here I have Bob. And I have an age, and let's go, 40. Now I want to create another, let's call it a greeting string. And this greeting string, I want to say, hello, Bob, you are 40 years old. Let me add the print statement as well so we can see what's going on. I want to have the greeting string, and let's run this. I can see, hello, Bob, you are 40 years old. Right now, the two values are matching. We have Bob here and Bob here, and we have 40 here and 40 here. But this is only the case because I have written Bob. If I change this Bob to Tom and run all of this again, we wouldn't see a difference. So what I want to do is to somehow get this name variable into here and this age variable into here. And Python has quite a few ways of achieving that. The one people tend to learn first is called format. This is just another method. This one works by adding curly brackets inside of your string where you want to add a variable. In my case, I want to replace the name with a curly bracket and the age with another curly bracket. And now I can add values into this format. This could, for example, be a 1 and a 2. If I run all of this now, I can see, hello 1, you are 2 years old. What Python has done here is it looked at the first curly brackets, and then it looked inside of format and found the first value. After that, it saw another curly bracket and looked for the second value inside of format and then inserted it into the string. Granted, just adding 1 and 2 in this example isn't particularly helpful. But what we can do is add variables in here as well, like name and age. If I run this now, we get, hello Tom, you are 40 years old. And this now means we can change these variables, let's say 100 and something. It really doesn't matter what it is. Although you do have to be careful about the order. If I switch them around with age coming first and then name, now we have hello 100, you are something years old. The order here being wrong messed all of this up, which can be kind of annoying, especially if you have longer strings where you want to add more variables. This can become very confusing. And as a consequence, Python has a way to make all of this more organized. You can, inside of the curly brackets, add something like variable names. Let me call them 1 and 2. And now you can assign 1 to name and 2 to the age. If I run this now, we are getting the same outcome. Although now we know very specifically which value is being assigned to which curly bracket. 1 gets this one here, and 2 is getting this value here. Meaning now we could assign age to 1, and I guess we could keep age for 2 as well. If I run this now, we get hello 100, you are 100 years old. The reason is we are assigning age to both 1 and 2, which is putting this age into here and into here. And that way you can be much more deliberate about where you put the variables. That being said, very few people use this kind of method because when you look at it, it's kind of inefficient. Why do we have to add a whole method with arguments? Why couldn't we just add variables straight inside of these curly brackets? That would be much better. And Python developers agree, and to achieve that, they have created what is called an f string. Let me create another variable. Let's call it greeting string better. For this one, I want to copy this entire string and paste it in here. And now I'm going to add the variables I want straight into the curly brackets. We have name for hello and age for years old. Although now, if I print greeting strings better, I am getting hello name, you are age years old. Python interprets this and this as a simple part of the string, which isn't ideal. To tell Python that these are supposed to be variables, we have to add an f at the beginning of the string. And that is all we need. If I run this now, we are getting hello something, you are 100 years old. And you can see it by the colors. The name and the age are not green anymore, which in our case means they are not a string anymore. Although your colors may vary depending on what color scheme you have. We can, let me return to Bob, who is 40 years old. This is still going to work. And this version here is much more readable than this one up here. I guess, let me fix it. This is better. But still, this one here is very annoying to read, whereas this one is really clear. And f strings can actually do quite a bit more. Inside of these curly brackets, you could even do basic math operations. For example, we could add age plus 10. All of this would also still work. With that, we have covered a lot of stuff for strings, and I think this part is getting quite long. So let's do an exercise and then finish it off. And what I want you guys to do is this one here. I want you guys to create an f string that says, hello, my name is X and my hobby is Y. X and Y should both be separate variables. And the second half of the sentence should be on a separate line. And by second half, I mean, and my hobby is Y. This should be on a separate line when it is being printed. Pause the video now and try this one yourself. Let me comment out all of this here so we're not getting confused. And now let's go through this step by step. First of all, I want to start by creating an f string here. Let me copy it and let's call this the exercise string. In here, I want hello, my name is X, my hobby is Y. Since we want X and Y to be in separate variables, X should be in curly brackets and Y should also be in curly brackets. And since we want Python to interpret these as variables, we need an f at the beginning of the string. So now we have to tell Python the values for X and Y. Let me put X here and Y here. Let's say for X, a value we haven't used yet is Lisa, and I don't know, programming. With that, I can print the exercise string, and we have, hello, my name is Lisa, my hobby is programming. This is already covering the first two parts of the exercise. Next up is the second half of the sentence should be on a separate line. And this we could approach in two different ways. The first one is we could use an escape character, meaning /n. And now if I run this, we get, hello, my name is Lisa, and my hobby is programming on two different lines. Another way of approaching this, let me copy it. You could use triple quotation marks. So I add 2 at the beginning and 2 more at the end. Now I get rid of the line break and put all of this on separate lines. I guess let me call this exercise string 2 and now print 2, and we're getting the same result. These 2 lines here and this line here both do practically the same thing. Although I guess this one is a bit more readable. Well, I guess it's debatable. You could choose here whichever you like, although be aware the first one is much more common. Also keep in mind here, the variable naming I used, capital X and capital Y, is quite bad. This should rather be called name and hobby,